It's the scandal that has finally caught the public's attention, and the problems with the Post Office Horizon IT system are by now well known and, of course, documented. But one of the biggest questions has always been, did Fujitsu, who wrote the software, know as early as 2010 about the bugs that led to sub-postmasters being convicted? Today, well, we got an answer.
Simple yes or no?
Well, I don't personally know, Chair. I think the inquiry is looking at that very point that you...
What's your gut feel?
My gut feel would be yes.
Sitting right behind Fujitsu Chief Exec Paul Paterson at the Select Committee hearing, one of those portrayed in the ITV drama, Jo Hamilton, little over a fortnight ago when she, and of course Alan Bates, sat in front of the telly to watch their dramatised selves. One wonders if they thought things would move this quickly. I'm Niall Paterson, and on this edition of the Sky News Daily, we will focus on a session in Parliament which saw the bosses of the Post Office and Fujitsu challenged time and again. Later, I'll be speaking to a former Post Office operator who was wrongly sent to prison when 8 weeks pregnant. First, though, to Nick Wallis, author of the Great Post Office Scandal, who's been following the story for more than 20 years now. Nick, great to have you on the Daily. Obviously, this evidence session of the Select Committee was billed pretty highly, given who was turning up. Did it live up to expectations for you?
The strongest news line to come out of it was the fact that Fujitsu have now formally committed that they have to a moral obligation to provide redress or compensation to the victims. They wouldn't put a figure on that, and they were picked up by the MPs who said, well, you haven't made a provision in your accounts for making a contribution to the compensation funds. And I think that is telling, frankly, because if Fujitsu were considering any kind of compensation or redress for the victims, it certainly should have been in its annual accounts. I do wonder what may have focused their minds over the last few weeks.
That does lead to the question. I mean, would we have been hearing from Fujitsu today had it not been for the ITV drama?
Well, I think the entire body politic has now focused its attention on the outrage that has been generated by the drama. And so I'm not entirely sure that we would have been having this evidence session and therefore we wouldn't have been hearing from Fujitsu. Fujitsu have only made one contribution in the public domain other than a very mealy-mouthed apology since the Horizon scandal broke in 2019, and that was a written series of answers to questions from the then chair of the Select Committee back in 2020. And a lot of that they said at the time, I was able to go through it and point out some factual inaccuracies. What we have today, rather than any facts really, other than that commitment to providing some form of redress, was a continuation of the tone of apology with very little in the way of content. And in fact, you could see the frustration from the MPs because neither Nick Reed, the chief executive of the Post Office, nor Paul Paterson were giving hard answers to the difficult questions they were being asked, which, given they respectively lead both their organisations, I think many MPs will find unsatisfactory, and certainly for viewing journalists and the viewers who are watching this live on Sky News would have been frustrated that they kept deflecting to the inquiry, which is also taking place as we speak.
Do they not, though, Mr. Reid and Mr. Paterson, have a point? The inquiry was set up precisely to answer the big picture questions and all of this. The Post Office, Fujitsu, so long as they provide that which they are demanded by the inquiry, surely that's the limit of their responsibility.
Well, no, they're before Parliament. Parliament is sovereign and MPs have the right to ask questions and they have the right to answer them under parliamentary privilege. The fact they're choosing not to was visibly irritating the MPs. I mean, Nick Reed could not even say that Paula Venables, the chief executive in 2015, was wrong to say there were no miscarriages of justice when she was before the Select Committee, when she patently was giving out false information. Now, whether she was knowingly giving out false information or whether the wrong information had been given to her, of course, is a different matter and one which will come to pass in the inquiry and possibly even the criminal justice process. But he would not even offer an opinion as to whether or not that was wrong, or as to whether or not any of the directors who were serving at the time that the Post Office was engaged in trying to cover up this scandal should be banned from serving as directors going forward. So again, the whiff of evasiveness did hang over the whole proceedings this afternoon.
I wonder whether you felt that that was the case when Nick Reed, of course, Chief Executive of the Post Office, was unable to answer the very straightforward question put to him repeatedly.
From your point of view, when do you think Post Office staff first knew that remote access to Horizon terminals was possible?
I couldn't give you an exact date on that.
Why can you not answer that question? It is fundamental to this case.
What is fundamental from our perspective is we are facilitating Sir Win getting to the bottom of all of these issues.
How long have you been the chief executive now?
Because coming into the organisation...
How long have you been the chief executive now?
4 years.
You must surely have had time in 4 years to cut to the heart of this issue, which is when did the Post Office know remote access to terminals was possible?
Explain why that is such a significant point in this inquiry.
The Post Office consistently denied, including to my colleagues on Panorama in 2015, that remote access to sub-postmasters' branch accounts had ever been possible. It was a crucial line that they had to maintain because, of course, sub-postmasters were being prosecuted for falsifying their own accounts. Now, if more than one person had access to those accounts, i.e. someone other than the sub-postmaster, a Fujitsu engineer, for instance, or technical people within the Post Office team, then of course none of the prosecutions could stand. What we have subsequently discovered through the work of the inquiry and through the group litigation in 2019 is that Fujitsu engineers could not only go into sub-postmasters' branch accounts and do what they wanted to them, including change the sums within those accounts, financial sums. They also did so without leaving a proper audit trail, for which they were roundly criticised by successive external auditors. So the Post Office in 2015 was peddling a lie to Parliament and to Panorama. And what the inquiry will have to find out is whether those executives were knowingly peddling a lie or whether or not they were being given false information. But what we do know for certain is that some people within the Post Office, some very senior people, some technical people, knew that remote access to the Horizon IT system was not just possible, but that people at Fujitsu were engaging with it on a regular basis.
Were you then in any way surprised at the admission by Paul Paterson that the likelihood was information provided by Fujitsu had led to innocent people being convicted?
Fujitsu are as complicit in this scandal and as complicit in this miscarriage of justice as the Post Office, but of course it was the Post Office that was taking decisions to prosecute its own sub-postmasters.
Of course, before we heard from the Post Office and Fujitsu, we heard from two of those at the very centre of the whole story, Alan Bates and Joe Hamilton. And the thing that struck me from their evidence today was the fact that it feels like, for whatever reason, people are still dragging their heels, that there is a sloth, a pace to this process that really needs to be accelerated.
I've described this as the third phase of the scandal. The first phase was when the Post Office was prosecuting innocent people at a rate of one a week over a period of 15 years. The next phase was the cover-up. When the Post Office realised that those prosecutions were unsafe, it went to extraordinary lengths to keep that truth hidden from the courts and the public. The third phase is since the postmasters have been proven right in the Court of Appeal and the High Court, with swingeing judgments against the Post Office's behaviour, the terribly sclerotic speed at which we're inching towards proper redress and compensation for the victims should be a shame on us all, actually. I think the way that the compensation schemes have been set up was almost designed to obfuscate and make things as difficult as possible and minimise the redress that these people should be getting. And the speed at which it's been happening is simply unforgivable. We know that more than 60 people have died whilst waiting for compensation. We heard today about a 91-year-old woman still hanging on for compensation. Why is it that Alan Bates, the leader of the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, submitted his compensation claim at the beginning of October under a promise that he would have a first offer within 40 working days? He hasn't received that offer yet. It really is absolutely mystifying as to why and how the compensation process has taken so long. And I feel so desperately sad for the sub-postmasters who genuinely do, as you heard in the Select Committee today, genuinely just want to put this behind them.
You have to wonder whether or not the government spends as much time going over the detail of the £6.8 billion worth of contracts that it has signed with Fujitsu since 2012. I mean, are you surprised by the scale of the business that has continued to be done with this organisation?
Fujitsu built its UK empire on the broken backs of prosecuted and convicted sub-postmasters. It has since turned into a multi-billion pound empire using the Horizon system as a cash cow to allow it to go out and get other government contracts. And so if Fujitsu were to walk away from those government contracts now, the public service arm of UK PLC would just fall over. So it's managed to get its claws into the government and into the public purse, and it's certainly not going to let go anytime soon. But as Mr. Paterson recognised, its international standing and its brand and its value has taken a huge knock as a result of the Horizon scandal. But I doubt the knock would have been so huge were it not for the drama and the impact it's had.
Nick, thank you. In just a moment, back to the human cost of the Horizon scandal, with one post office operator wrongly convicted and sent to prison. Welcome back. So, with profuse apologies from both the Post Office and Fujitsu, and a promise of a contribution to the compensation fund from the latter, you might imagine that the world might start to move on from the story. But imagine if you had been wrongly convicted because of the Horizon system, would you ever be able to forget about it? Seema Misra is a former post office operator who was convicted and eventually cleared of theft. Seema, begin by telling us why your son's 10th birthday will be one you'll never be able to forget.
On 11th of November 2010, on my eldest and 10th birthday, I was sentenced for 15 months while being 8 weeks pregnant.
Wow.
For the crime I never committed. It was so difficult to believe. I still can't come in terms with it. I thought it will be all fine. Why would I be sent to the prison for the crime I never committed? But when the judge said 15-month imprisonment, all I remember when I opened my eyes next day, I was in the hospital. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't take it.
What was prison like then, knowing, as you did, that you were innocent?
Horrible. For that, like going to the prison for the crime I never committed, I brought like a shame to my own family. So if I would have been pregnant, I would have killed myself. It's just my baby inside me, older one waiting at home, and my husband kept me going. Otherwise, there's no way I could have survived.
And of course, the case that sent you to prison, the case in October 2010, was something of a test case. It was designed to focus on the reliability, or otherwise, as we now know, of the information collected by Horizon.
Correct. Like they knew they had a report of errors and everything. They didn't disclose the information. Otherwise, it would have been a completely different case. What my take after all the witnesses, after all the proof we received later on, that they wanted my case to set as an example to others. If you blame on Horizon, this is what happened to you. But I have to say they chose the wrong person. They thought like, I'll just sit down quietly and cry and all that. We won't do anything. But here we go.
Of course, you did not give up. You took your case and won an appeal. But at that moment of conviction, I can't believe I'm reading this right now, there were bosses at the post office and elsewhere who were celebrating your conviction.
They did. They wanted to save their ego and save Horizon. We had a faith in the system. We had a faith in the post office. They're going to look after me. And what they did, they just misuses their power and celebrated that they managed to set up a right example.
Well, of course, things are now moving in the opposite direction, thanks in part, of course, to the ITV drama, but of course also thanks to individuals like yourself who did not accept their convictions sitting down. I'm now just wondering, it's over 13 years since your conviction. I'm wondering what you think right now of the two big protagonists in all of this. Fujitsu, who supplied the software, and the post office who used it.
I heard Fujitsu said they're going to take a moral responsibility. That's good that, they've taken a tiny step forward, but they said they're going to contribute toward money toward the victim, but that should be directly between Fujitsu and the post office victim solicitors, because we know what's going to happen if the money goes towards the post office. It's just going to be swallowed up in the legal costs and all that.
Well, that is the point, isn't it? That actually today at the Select Committee, both the representative from the post office and from Fujitsu seem to be passing the buck almost to the public inquiry itself, saying, well, these are questions that are best to be explored through the inquiry. That is what the process has been set up to do. Do you feel that they were perhaps ducking some of the bigger questions today?
Of course, yeah. So we can see black and white, people being culprit, people, they were a part of the scandal, but they're still roaming around freely. Post Office, Royal Mail, Fujitsu, the UK Parliament, UK government, each and every person who was responsible for the scandal, who knew about the scandal, they still let it go and make my life and other fellow people's life miserable.
Do you think it is likely, though, that you will see those convictions?
See, we won't give up. Definitely won't give up till we get proper justice with accountability. Otherwise, our fight will be no use. We need to set up a right example. The law need to be changed. Law need to be amended. That should be like a same law for everybody, either people in authority or a common individual like me and you. Anger is just growing. Like, see, every time we go to the court or anything, something new comes up, like from the post office, like shredding documents or anything. So they make me like angry more and more.
Well, look, why don't we end on something slightly more positive, Seema? How is the family now?
They are brilliant. I'm truly, truly blessed with a wonderful family.
Good, I'm glad to hear it. Seema Misra, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Back to Nick Wallis for a final thought. Nick, where does this story go next? I presume we have to wait for the inquiry to conclude. We have to wait to see its conclusions and its recommendations in full. But of course, as was mentioned at the committee today, there are more people coming forward who have been affected by this story.
And that's not necessarily surprising, given how people hid themselves away from their communities after this cloak of shame was thrown around them, and they felt that they didn't want to participate in their communities' lives anymore. And that also means the media, and that also means reading and seeing information that's coming through from the media about this whole process. So I am not surprised that people are now finally finding it within themselves to be able to make contact with the authorities that they used to trust so much and now are unable to as a result of what happened to them, and saying, well, okay, if my story is going to be believed, if I'm finally going to have my conviction quashed and there is a path to getting proper redress and compensation, then that's great that they are coming forward. Resources should be thrown at processing these claims and getting these convictions quashed and ensuring that everyone who lost money gets proper redress. Given that the Treasury has set aside more than £1 billion in order to both run the compensation schemes and pay redress, you would have thought that they could resource the people who are tasked with processing the compensation claims a lot better, i.e. just throw more bodies at it, but also tell the people who are involved in this not to litigate, not to drag the process down into unnecessary requests for minute details about what happened. It should be something that the claimants' lawyers and the government and the post office's lawyers should work out much more quickly. The second issue, as you mentioned, accountability. Yes, everyone is looking at the inquiry to see exactly who knew what when. But the next phase after that will be the Metropolitan Police investigation, which is now entering its third year. It's only interviewed 2 people under caution twice, but it's now looking at fraud, the possibility that individuals at the post office took money off individual sub-postmasters by deception, i.e. without doing a proper investigation into why this money was allegedly missing. A conspiracy to pervert the course of justice at the post office, i.e. were executives either deliberately turning a blind eye to problems with Horizon or denying the knowledge of things like remote access or the fact they had prosecuted people unfairly when they knew full well that there were problems. And then perjury, whether or not Fujitsu engineers went to court or signed witness statements which they knew to be false during the prosecution of individual sub-postmasters. Now that process takes years. And if you look at our country's track record of being able to successfully prosecute executives or companies who've done wrong in the past in other scandals, I'm not holding my breath as to whether we'll ever see anyone convicted for this scandal, which it would be a crying shame.
And of course, we all now wait for the public inquiry to run its course, for its conclusions and recommendations to be published, also for the legislation overturning the Post Office convictions to make its way through the Houses of Parliament. By which point, no doubt, precious few of those involved at the Post Office or Fujitsu will still be working for those organisations. Now, that, of course, doesn't mean that they can escape responsibility or accountability. But if in the end it turns out that the only people who end up with a criminal conviction are those falsely accused sub-postmasters, that would surely be the biggest scandal of all. That's your lot for this edition of The Daily. We'll see you next time.